Here is another asynchronous task which is a little bit complex, so you need some time to solve it, and you can't really solve it like in 3 or 5 minutes. As you can see here, we must design a utility which takes a URL and a value for attempts, which will attempt to make a fetch request. If we have a failure, then this function will try again to fetch some data with increasing delay for number of times which user has requested, which actually means we must create a function which will fetch a specific URL that we will provide. And we also have some amount of attempts, and we want to refetch this data again and again for several times if we didn't get a success message. And actually this is a really common problem, because sometimes our API is not working or data are not there and we want to try it again. So let's try and create this function, and I want to name it, for example, request manager. And actually here we will get our URL because we want to fetch something from the outside and every time something new. And here we have some options for our URL, and the last parameter will be attempts. And by default it may be 3, for example, so we're trying to refetch some stuff 3 times. And this is how we will use this. So we have here request manager and we're providing some URL. And I will use here some URL which does not exist. In this case we will refetch it. So we have foo.com, and this function must return for us a promise. This is why here we have then, and here we have success and error. This is why here we're awaiting some response, and we can just write console log, for example, response, to check if it's working. So this is how we will typically use this function. We want to fetch some URL and we simply have then. And obviously here we can pass some options, for example method post and some body, or amount of attempts if we want to change it. If we didn't pass anything, then here we don't have any options and our attempt is 3. Now the question is what we want to return here. And the most important point to understand how we will build it, we will run this function recursively, because this is the easiest way to call this function several times. And the idea is that we will call in the catch request manager again here, and we will simply provide here inside URL, options, and then attempts we will decrease. Which means at the beginning we have 3 attempts, now the next time it will be 2, then 1, and then we will throw an error because we don't have any remaining attempts. So first of all we must return here a promise, because this is what we are waiting outside. This is why here we are returning new promise, and here we have our resolve and reject. Now inside this function we want to try and fetch our data, and we will simply use here fetch function because it is available for us natively. And inside we are passing first of all our URL and secondly options. And now here we have our then and we have catch. And actually on then we can simply call our resolve, and this will pass the success data directly inside resolve because resolve is a function. And here we also want a catch. So here inside catch, we want to do our magic. So here we are getting our error and we want to call our request manager again. But here we must know when our attempt is the last one. So here I want to create a property is last attempt. And here we can just check if our attempt equals 1. In this case we know, okay, this is the last time when we can call our request manager. And after this we are checking if this is the last attempt, then we want to return reject error, which actually means we are just rejecting our promise because we can't continue anymore. And after this, if we don't have is last attempt, then we want to make set timeout, because actually we want to call this function only after some time. It doesn't make any sense to call it directly after, because maybe API is still down. So here I will write set timeout, for example, with 3 seconds. And obviously we can also implement an argument to pass the interval to call data. And inside set timeout, we want to request our data again. So here we will call request manager and we are passing here URL, now options, and the last one will be attempts -1, which actually means we don't store attempts anywhere. We simply provide recursively in request manager decreased amount of attempts. This is why here on the first time it is 3, then we are coming here in set timeout, it is 2, 1, and then we check this attempt equals 1, and we're here inside this if, and we're rejecting it. So let's check if it's working. I'm reloading browser, and as you can see we're getting get and an error because this URL does not exist, and we're getting attempts is not defined on line 13 inside our set timeout. And actually the name of said argument here is not correct, it's not a temp but attempts, because we have several of them. And also here it should be attempts equal 1 and not a temp. Let's reload it again. As you can see, we are getting get error. Then after 3 seconds, we are getting this request again, because we tried again, and here we have uncaught error failed to fetch, which actually means here we must write not only then, but also catch, because here we will get an error if we can't fetch data. And here we can just write console log error, and here we want to see our error. But as you can see, we still are getting error uncaught type error failed to fetch, which means our code is not 100% correct. And actually the problem is here that this is our first call of request manager and we're handling it outside with then and catch. But here inside the timeout we have request manager, but we don't have then and catch. This is why it is breaking. So we have an error in our third call, and this is here, but we didn't specify what will happen with it. This is why here we must write then, and here we want to resolve it with data and also catch. And on catch we simply want to reject. In this case it will work correctly. Let's try this out. I'm reloading the page. We're getting 3 errors, and now our error is bubbled outside and we see type error failed to fetch. So in this case it is working correctly. So you should not forget to bubble our inner request manager outside with then and catch. So I might say this function is quite complicated, so if you receive something like this on interview, you really must take your time to solve it correctly. You can't really design such function in a matter of minutes.